Welcome to Junkyard Theory, everybody. And in the house tonight, we got Zack Arnold. Zack and I have been trying to make this happen for quite a while, and I think after 6 months of back and forth, we finally got the man in the house. Zack, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome. I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm excited about this as well, and I apologize that my calendar has been your worst enemy and my worst enemy, including horrible bout of COVID. Just like the day before you and I are going to record, all of a sudden leveled for almost a month with COVID. It took me 3 years. I avoided it. Then all of a sudden it hit me, and I basically had to hit select all delete on my calendar. And you were one of the casualties, but there's no way that I wasn't going to reschedule. So I'm here, and I'm glad that we're doing this, and I'm very excited about it.
Amazing, amazing, and I'm really happy to see you. Glad to know that you're doing so much well, and you beat it. You beat COVID.
Yeah, we're here.
We're here, man. So I want to get into Cobra Kai and everything you've done, but before that, talk to me about your origin story. Where are you from? Who is Zack Arnold? How did Zack Arnold come to be where he is today?
Oh boy, that's we could probably turn this into a 3 or 4 part episode, and this could take several hours.
Let's
But as
have the
far as
abridged version.
sure, it's the abridged version as far as how it kind of leads us into Cobra Kai. Is that I grew up in as far away from Los Angeles and Hollywood in the movie industry as possible. Grew up in northern Wisconsin in the Midwest, literally in the middle of nowhere in a farming community. But I always loved movies. And when I was about 9 or 10 years old, my brother, who was a little bit older than me, he came home with a camcorder. Like I'm sure a lot of your younger audience might have seen it in the old movies where you've got it on like your shoulder, right? Like the VHS camcorder. He's like, "Oh, let's run around and make a movie." I thought, "Oh, that sounds like fun." So we ran around the house the entire weekend, used like Nintendo Duck Hunt guns, and we're just chasing each other and doing all this stupid stuff. And at the end of the weekend, he showed me the what we'd ended up shooting. It was like 8 or 9 minutes. And I was like, "That's it? We put in all this work and that's all we have." Like, I hated the process. To this day, I still hate production and hate being on set. But a couple of weeks later, he came and he showed me the finished version, and he had scored it with the score from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I swear it's the coolest thing that I had ever seen. And my jaw dropped, and I said, "How did you do that?" And that's when my love of editing began. So as early as middle school, I was taking two VHS players and I was hitting play and record, and I was creating my own little mini movies and montages and putting together clips from different films, not realizing that this craft was actually something you could do for a living. You think to yourself, at least back then. Nowadays things are very different, but back then you just assumed that movies, the TV shows, the commercials, they just existed. There wasn't a process of creating them, they just were. And I didn't know that there was a process until I went to college and realized I could actually do this for a living. So I went to college and learned film and video theory, did some production courses to learn the process, moved out to Los Angeles right after I graduated from college. And I started in trailers as an assistant, moved up to editing trailers, then moved into low budget features. And then eventually, after about 8 or 9 years, moved into the world of television and worked on shows such as Burn Notice, Empire, Glee, and then of course, the kind of the crowning achievement so far of my career would be the 4 seasons that I've worked on Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai. That's how I came across you. And season 4 was when I saw your name graduate from editor to associate producer.
Correct.
And
Yeah, that happened between 4 and 5. Yep.
yeah, talk to me about that. What was it like
Yeah. So
climbing that ladder?
Well, it's funny because when I think about climbing that ladder, all of that happened during COVID. So literally, there was no ladder, and it's just been me stuck in this room that you see now in front of this computer for years on end. So it didn't feel like climbing a ladder. Nothing about my life changed other than the title that was on the show and some of my responsibilities. But essentially, the genesis of the conversation was that when I first started on the show, season 2, and the only reason that I didn't work on season 1 is I didn't know the show existed. Had I known it existed before it was in production, I would have gone after it. But I didn't know it existed until I saw it come out on YouTube. And when I saw it come out on YouTube, I said, I have to work on the show. So I used all of the networking tools that I teach in my coaching program, and I got myself on the show season 2. And seasons 2, 3, and 4, it evolved from I was just working on only the episodes in my rotation. Because in television, different than features, because there's so much work to do, there's multiple editors, and you get on a rotation of every 3 episodes, every 4 episodes. But what ended up happening is I started to become like the go-to editor on the entire team when they specifically wanted a really kick-ass, cool training montage. That's kind of one of my specialties. And because of that, I started working on multiple episodes outside of my rotation. And I eventually went to the showrunners and to the producer of the show and said, I'd like to have more involvement, looking at the overall season, being more involved in other episodes, and also just helping to coordinate schedules and help streamline workflows and kind of work on the team level. So when I pitched that idea, they liked the idea and was able to still maintain my rotation, but also get the associate producer credit as well.
Gotcha. That's so amazing because I'm pretty sure you grew up with the Karate Kid series as well, which is where I'm guessing your love for the show
Mm-hmm.
comes from. And when you are an editor, you are so intricately involved in the process. You are responsible, of course, with the director's guidance in putting together this story from beginning to end. So in a way, no one knows the footage like you do.
Yeah,
No one
the
knows.
Karate Kid was basically my Star Wars
Mm,
growing up. So most kids my age were growing up. When I was born right after Star Wars, so I'm definitely dating myself. But I can distinctly remember Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi coming out in theaters. That's how old I am. Like the originals coming out in the theater, I was never interested in those. But as soon as the Karate Kid came out, I was obsessed with it. So
why?
that was because it was so similar to my own personal story of me having gone through for most of my young life, going through significant amounts of bullying and feeling
Hmm.
like an outsider. So there's a lot of that I resonated with, and I've always resonated with Eastern philosophy, and it's because of the Karate Kid that I learned martial arts for years, and I still use a lot of Eastern philosophy in my coaching and my teachings and my mentorship. But I always resonated with the Karate Kid series. So when I saw that Cobra Kai was going to be the series, my first response was, "Well, how dare they? I can't. They're going to ruin my childhood," which with a lot of these remakes they have. So I was really concerned that they were going to destroy the saga. And then when I saw the trailer for it, as much as I wanted to hate it, I thought, "Huh, this doesn't look awful. Fine, I'll hate watch the pilot. I'll hate watch the first episode, and then like everybody else, watch the first episode. 5 hours later, watch the whole season because I couldn't put it down, and said
Yeah.
I have to work on this. But it wasn't just a matter of I was looking for a gig and there was an opening. It was that I knew that I was the right fit to be able to tell that story because as an editor, like you said, you're so involved in so many of the story decisions, and yeah, ultimately you have the showrunners that are writing the scripts with their writing team. You have directors that are coming in and making a lot of creative choices as well. But the way that I always describe what I do to people that don't understand the profession as well, and even people in the industry don't really understand what the editors do. But you imagine that you're spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars per episode to bring together hundreds of crew members, these giant sets, all these locations. And then what do? They put all of it on a little tiny thumb drive and hand it to one person and say, here you go, make our show for us. That's a big responsibility. And for a show like Cobra Kai that has so much history with the original Miyagi verse, you need somebody that not just can go back and watch the footage, but really understands the emotional moments that resonate. So there are so many little decisions and Easter eggs about music choices or montages where if you didn't know the series at all, you'd watch the show and you'd say, oh, this is good. But you had these emotional rushes where you're like, oh my God, that
Mhm.
reminds me of how I felt when I watched this or that. And to me, that is so key in making the show what it is. And you can't recreate that. If you haven't grown up with it and you don't have those emotions built into you, you don't know how to make those editorial choices.
Exactly. It's like the nostalgia kind of seeps through your blood and onto screen through the editing choices that you
Mm-hmm.
make, the music choices. It's so visible that there's a lot of love that's poured into Cobra Kai from season one to season four. And I especially love that, like you said, you wanted to hate watch it, but you ended up loving it because it's one of those very rare little gems that they kind of got the sequels right. The
Mm-hmm.
revival was done right. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? Besides the editing, when you got on to the show, what else did you see? Like everybody else who was working with you, what was the coordination like? What was the collaboration like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my feeling is that when in a conversation that I have all the time is people say, "Why is the show so good? Like, how
Hmm.
have you taken something that was, a show from 30, 40 years ago
I would actually
and
say it's better. I mean, like
and
the
that's the thing. It's not just that it's
yeah,
as good. A lot of people feel that it's actually better and they want to crack the code. Like they want to be able to really break it down and understand why. And I can tell you that the formula is pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's a pretty simple formula to break down, which is
Mhm.
number one, there's a tremendous amount of respect and honor for the original series. You can tell that everybody that works on it loves the original series and we respect it and we're not making fun of it. Every once in a while, there might be a little jab at something, but for the most part, we love and honor and respect that original universe and the original characters. So that's the first part. And I feel that a lot of reboots and remakes, they're like, we're just going to reinvent this. And they're like, yeah, but you didn't respect or maintain the things that we loved about it. And you started over and you basically destroyed it. So that's the first part of the formula that's so important. The
Mm.
second part is we're not just remaking it, we're adding new layers to it. So if you look at it tonally, for example, the sense of humor and also the music choices and the energy are completely different than the original Karate Kid. So if you go back and you watch Cobra Kai first, if you're younger and that was the first exposure that you had, the Karate Kid feels like a completely different universe, right? You're not going to hear a bunch of 80s rock music and all this, like these cool, like Guns N' Roses style montages in the Karate Kid. It's much more traditional. It had a lot more influence of that Eastern philosophy. It's much more emotional. It's much more character driven. So they're very, very different shows, but they feel like they're in the same general world, but it's been updated. So I think it's the combination of we're willing to take chances and make choices to shape Cobra Kai as its own series, but we always honor the original source material, and it's finding the balance of both of those things that I think is the magic of the show.
My family, we rewatch the entire show at least once a year since it's come out. That's how much we love it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much we
Yeah,
love it. Me and my
it's
girlfriend
funny.
connected on Cobra Kai as well. So, I mean, I grew up on the Karate Kid series, so it's got a very special place in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a practitioner as well, so you kind of, I guess, more. I mean, I love Star Wars, but at the same time, Karate Kid is more relatable.
Mm-hmm.
It's very grounded. It's it's a street level story, I guess you could
Mm-hmm.
say. And I really like the fact that what you mentioned. You update the story, and I guess the editing choices also. Like, I mean, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty technicalities of editing. I don't think anyone's interested in hearing that unless you have editors listening, tuning in. But was there anything that because film editing itself, the style has changed from back when it was back in the 80s to now? What worked back then, even the way you cut trailers, it's not the same way. It's evolved. So is there anything specific that you could tell me about your own approach, your editing approach to something, not just Cobra Kai, but editing in general, based on
Sure.
what you've seen and how it's evolved through the
Yeah.
years?
So as far as how it's evolved through the years, I could go much deeper into this from more of a neuroscientific level because I'm actually interested in this, like from the neural level and the
The
brain development level.
neurocinematics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because if just the way that we consume information,
Mm.
we have an expectation of the number of cuts per second and the energy of something. And I've seen this specifically with watching my son grow up and showing him movies. I'll show him a movie that I loved from the 80s that I remember just being awesome. And he's bored to death because it's too slow. Because he's
Ex-
used to Mr. Beast style editorial or TikTok, like all these things where the expectation is it's moving so quickly. Our brains literally rewire to that expectation. So what would have given me a dopamine hit in the 80s, that speed or that energy has no effect on today's brains. So part of it is just the evolution of intuitively what our brains expect, right? But
yeah.
another part of my approach is that I always make it about story and I always want to find what is the simplest editorial solution to create the emotion that I want to create. So I am not all about I want to learn all the fanciest plugins or all the fancy techniques. If that's necessary for the style, then sure, I'll dive into all of it. Like Burn Notice is here's everything in the kitchen sink as far as editorial choices and box sequences and Sapphire plugins, but it's part of the storytelling and part of the tone, right? I would never take those techniques and throw them in Cobra Kai because tonally they're not the right fit and it's not the way that we want to tell the story. So I'm always taking the simplest approach and the least number of cuts to be able to create the emotion and create the story that we want to tell, knowing that for specific shows there are certain frameworks or blueprints for how I want to approach the editorial style. So the simplest version, and again we could go much deeper into the weeds, but the most general approach that I have to Cobra Kai is I have one goal, is that when I ship a cut to the showrunners, my goal is they're going to give me the note, you pushed it too far, you need to come back.
Come
They've
back.
never once given me that note, but I continually am pushing the envelope on the music choices, on the way that a montage is structured or way that it's cut. I'm always trying to push the envelope, knowing that they want to push the envelope, but I've always been trying to find their limit. Like an example would be in the end of season 5, where we have this literal sword fight in an outside jacuzzi between
Chosen and
yeah, Chosen and Silver. Thank you.
yeah.
That was one where I'm like, oh come on, like they're gonna tell me this is too much because I just blew that thing way out of proportion with like the slow motion and the giant, metal shings with the swords and the music and everything else. I'm like, they're gonna give you the note that this has gone too far, and their note was, we love it. So that to me is a mindset that I approach Cobra Kai. But if I were doing like a small indie character story, that's not the approach that I would take. But I
Mm.
know those showrunners, and I know that we're trying to push the envelope and really trying to push the energy of the show. So that's my mindset. I want to get the note, you've taken it too far, you need to pare it back. And if anything, it's usually the opposite. I'll give them something that I think is really crazy and balls to the wall, and they're like, we love it, but it needs to go further. I'm like, seriously, you want more? Like one of the montages that I worked on that wasn't in one of my episodes was the reverse training montage in episode 402, where
Mm.
Daniel was training Johnny and Johnny was training Daniel. That was
Yes.
one where I had like picked this balls to the wall ACDC track, and they're like, it needs more energy. I'm like, are we talking about the same montage? So it's all about how do we just push the energy and push the envelope. But that's the approach to Cobra Kai. On a different show, the approach might be very, very different. But for me, it's always what's the simplest solution to create the emotion that we want to create.
I really like that simplest, the simplest method to get from point A to point B, essentially. Because sometimes, as a director, I guess you have these very specific shots where you're emotionally attached because you know how much time it took to shoot that thing. But as an
Mm-hmm.
editor, I get, I don't know if how often you end up on set, but I, from what I've seen, my experience with editors and everybody I've interviewed, it's like they're brutal. Their goal is to tell the story as simply as they can, and sometimes there's obviously clashes between the director and the editor. But how often do you get your way where you're like, okay, like maybe the director had some other approach to the specific scene, but
Mm-hmm.
you show your version, and how often does that get picked over the
Yeah.
director?
So the one thing to clarify that's really important
Mm.
specifically with the editor director relationship, or in TV, it's more so the editor showrunner or showrunners relationship.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
never trying to get my way. For
Mm.
me, I believe that the best idea wins, and it's my job to be the shepherd for the story. So it's not about, well, my idea is better than yours. It's, I think this better serves the story and the goal that we're trying to achieve and the vision that we want to create. And sometimes the director or the showrunners have a different vision for how we get there versus mine. But I never want it to be an argument of egos. If my idea was better than yours, or this solution because it's mine was better, it's, is this best for the story, right? But having said that, yeah, there are going to be a lot of discussions, especially if they've been on set. Let's say that they spent 8 hours creating this super elaborate crane shot, or in the case of Cobra Kai, it's now become synonymous with, at least in the finales, this giant oneer of this massive fight sequence, right? So seasons 2, 3, and 4 all have this, follow shot through this giant fight sequence with a oneer, right? Or at least seasons 2 and 3. I don't think that 4 had one that I can remember. Um,
I
but
love that. I love that. I mean, it's more of a very contemporary approach, but it works.
yeah, exactly. So that's an example of, imagine spending an entire day on set trying to get
Mm.
one shot in Steadicam, knowing that you probably spent 1 to 2 weeks beforehand doing the
Rehearse.
coordination, doing the setup, rehearsing. Like, you don't just shoot that and get it. That takes weeks of preparation and setup, right? So
Yeah.
from that perspective, it has to be in the show because we put so much time and effort into it. But from my perspective, I don't care. I'm your first audience member, and all I see is what's inside the box. I don't see outside the screen, right? I don't see all the preparation. I only see what the audience does. And in season 5, they did the exact same thing when they had this giant oneer, and I didn't put it in the cut. And they're like, where's our oneer? I'm like, it didn't work. right? I know you guys wanted in there, and I know that that was the goal, and I know how much you prepared for it. It didn't work, and it's distracting, and it takes me out of the story. And some filmmaking teams would have said, are you crazy? Do you realize how long it took us to do that? Our showrunner's response was, okay, this works, right? They're willing to make that sacrifice knowing that it's not the right choice for the story. Whereas in seasons 2 and 3, we did a lot of work to really make sure that that oneer was seamless all the way through, right? Because I'm assuming that this has been said somewhere before, but technically we were stitching together pieces here and there because it's impossible to get that flawless. They're pretty close to being flawless, but there's a couple of pieces that we kind of had to stitch together with visual effects so it looks like it's seamless. But in season 5, I just had to make the executive decision that I don't think that it's worth going down this rabbit hole because it's not going to be the best for the story, and everybody agreed. But I'm very, very rarely on set. One of the reasons logistically is just because most of the shows that I work on don't shoot in Los Angeles. So Cobra Kai shot in Atlanta. 3 or 4 of the other shows I worked on were not shot locally either. But even if I am local, I try to stay offset as much as possible. Number one, because like I talked about, even when I was 9 years old, not a big fan of the chaos of production. But number two, once I'm on set, I lose my objectivity. And I've
Mm,
had that experience where I visited for maybe an afternoon. I've watched a few shots. I see those shots differently when I'm watching the dailies because I know where the lights were, or I know the cheat with the sandbag or the flag, or where somebody, I don't want to see any of that. I want to be as objective as possible. So I think that to make the best editorial choices, I should stay away from set as much as possible. That's my own personal philosophy.
do you ever have people editors working on set to assemble these shows? Because I mean, it's a massive undertaking, and like I mean, the most recent short, the couple of short films that I worked on, I had people on set, basically, stitching things up together on the fly so that we could see things, if it actually worked, or else
Mm-hmm.
it just saved us time when we knew, oh, we need like a couple more shots to make this scene
Yeah.
work perfectly. So do you guys also do that?
We don't do it on this show. I know that it's becoming more and more common because the
Yeah.
technology literally allows it where, especially if you're going camera to cloud, you can hit the stop button on a shot and your editor's looking at it 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
So it's much, much easier to do that. I've never worked that way. And to be honest, it's not a way that I would want to work, but I know that it's becoming more common. I'm a big believer that in order to be as objective as possible, I really want to be detached from the production process, and I want to
Mm.
immerse myself in the excuse me, I want to immerse myself in the scene the way that the audience will. So I
Yeah.
find it to be a distracting part of the process. And this happens every once in a while, not on set, but I'll be working on something and they'll say, hey, we just shipped you a bunch of dailies. We need you to cut the scene together immediately because we need to do pickups or we need to schedule an extra day and we need to know how it cuts together. And I'm fine to do that. But my approach to that scene creatively is going to be very different than if I had the time to immerse myself in it. And I feel that that affects the outcome. So it's I realize that with production schedules and budgets, that having the luxury of I want to be the most effective with how I immerse myself in the creative process is not always the number one priority. But my personal preference is that I just want to be left alone. Let me ingest the material myself and look at it and make the best choices rather than just rush through it and cut the pieces together and let us know if we need anything else. But that is becoming a lot more common. It's not my preferred working style, but it is a fairly common working style, especially in features. On
Yeah.
most of the bigger budget features, at least during production, there's a trailer right on set where they just have the entire post team making sure that they're keeping up to camera.
Exactly. And I've always wanted to get somebody who knew about neurocinematics, and you are the first guest. You're guest number 75 on the show.
Mm,
So, well, it is kind of monumental to me. And this is the first time someone's mentioned the term neurocinematics. So, what can you tell me about it? Because I've tried reading up on it and tried reaching out to people to get them on the show, mostly people in the academia field, but
hmm
haven't been successful to date. But as an editor, and you having mentioned the term neurocinematics, give me a little bit about your understanding of this field.
Yeah, so I'm coming at this very much from the perspective of I dabble, and I like to read books, and I've talked to a few people on my own podcast, not so much about neurocinematic specifically, but just understanding neuroscience. I love understanding how the brain works and how it's wired because it helps us better understand ourselves and our relationship with the world. So I won't get into the existentialism and whether or not we're living in the matrix, and that's a whole other conversation. But as
We should.
far
Okay,
as
I'm gonna book you for another one.
yeah, we can talk about that some other time. But as far as how I can combine my understanding of neuroscience with being an editor, I think that the most important skill that we need to have to not just be proficient editors, but be great editors is empathy.
Mm.
And this is especially important with the transition to artificial intelligence that we're now seeing, where if your job as an editor is to take a bunch of raw footage and just assemble the pieces and make sure that it's all in chronological order based on a script and everything has continuity, less than 5 years, in a year or two, computers are going to do all of that. What sets us apart is our human intelligence. And the number one skill that you need to hone and refine as an editor to be great at what you do is empathy. So you understand what are the characters feeling on screen such that the audience is feeling the same thing. And how that connects with neuroscience is there's this thing called mirror neurons. And when we look at other people, and this is something that everybody has experienced because it's hardwired into our DNA and our evolution, right? If I'm looking at you and I smile, right, you're going to start smiling. If I
Yes.
laugh, you're going to laugh. If I yawn, you might yawn. All of these things are contagious, right? So empathy is a much deeper level of that, where with any of the like little tiny micro movements of our facial expressions, we feel things. At least if we're not psychos. I mean, if you're literally, psychopathic, you don't feel those things and you have no empathy. So if you're Dexter, you don't feel those things, right? But in general, empathy is based on mirror neurons. If you're feeling sad and the micro expressions on your face are saying that you're sad, I'm going to feel some of that sadness, and it's going to change my expression, and it's going to change the way that I feel. So the more you can tap into that empathy and understanding of mirror neurons, the more you can manipulate. And I don't say manipulate in a bad way, but our job as editors is to manipulate emotion, is to take the audience on an emotional journey. And the more tapped in I am to somebody's facial expressions and the nuance of their performance, the more I can predict how you're going to feel when you're watching this take versus this take versus this take. So if you were going to look at least where AI is currently, and say, I have 5 performances, choose the best take for me, AI
Mm.
has no idea how to do that. That's our job as humans. It's our ability to empathize and understand which one of these makes me feel the saddest. Therefore, if I make this choice, it's going to make the audience feel the saddest or the happiest or the most scared, whatever the emotion might be. So tapping into the understanding of our neuroscience and how we interact with each other as humans, that's what sets us apart from all the technology that's to come. So if it's a matter of, well, I want to learn this AI tool or learn keyboards or macro commands, all that's helpful. But if you want to future proof yourself as an editor, learn neuroscience and understand how to increase your level of empathy.
I think that's such a little gem of knowledge that you just give, because people are either going all for it or against it, and this doesn't get spoken about enough. Like, what sets us apart from the machines? It's our humanity, like you very correctly said. And at the same time, uh, when it comes to editing, something that the editors that I've had on the show have spoken about is the fact that, and I agree with this, that the performances are also quote unquote manipulated by the editors. So if somebody ever wins an best actor, actress, Oscar, or at least even a nomination, they have the editor to thank for in a great part. But this doesn't get spoken about enough.
Yeah,
Because you
and
can,
I would say that it's true to varying degrees. So I've never cut anything with Tom Hanks, for example, but my guess is that given Tom Hanks's level of ability and experience and his skill as an actor, he probably doesn't require a lot of manipulation. My guess is that he nails it and he's earned every Oscar that he's gotten. But
yeah,
then like I said, it's to varying degrees. There are other actors, and
yeah.
I'm not going to name any names, but there are other actors that literally couldn't get a sentence out to save their lives. And that's our job as editors to make it sound like they can speak coherent English, right?
Mhm.
And there are people that are acting at that level that are also winning awards. So in that case, yeah, the editors deserve a tremendous amount of credit. But to say that the editors universally deserve all the credit for performances, I don't think that that's true at all. But to also say that the actors deserve universal 100% credit for their performance and their accolades, also not true. There's a varying degree of nuance. But I would say that the more the technology advances, and this is actually one of the biggest points of contention right now with all the strikes, is that with all the new advancing technology, the ability to manipulate performances is skyrocketing, which is now
Mm.
scaring the actors, and rightfully so. I very much understand where they're coming from, because we're now at the point where we can pretty much replace them 100% with technology. But I don't think that that's a viable long-term solution, going back to our previous conversation. To assume that artificial intelligence understands the nuances of facial expression and empathy in the human experience, we're not there yet. We might get there. We're definitely not there yet. But I think the same can be said for this conversation of how much credit does an editor deserve for a performance. Completely and totally depends on the actor. There are some actors you can just say in point at the beginning of the line, out point at the end of the scene, stay on them, perfect. They win their award. Then there are other actors where you get maybe a second and a half. They say part of their line, you cut to a reaction, you finagle a Frankenbite, then you cut back to them for the next part that works on camera. It all totally depends. But
Yeah,
I would say there's at least some degree of manipulation for almost all performances.
I agree with that, and that's way better put together than I put it across. And with regards to that, it kind of reminded me about fight scenes.
Mm-hmm.
That's something again, you guys go for longer takes and wider shots as well, as opposed to one of the recent movies where it's like close up, chop chop, so you don't really see the action. And I mean, I'm assuming that this is a combination of cinematography, choreography, and direction when it comes to on set how they shoot it. But with the edit, again, you can manipulate. You can just blow up the footage, like punch in on it too. But is there like a conscious decision that you make when you are editing fight sequences?
Yes,
To
very
yeah.
very much so. I'm a lot more old school in
Mm,
that I do not want the editorial choices to drive the fight. I want the
mm,
fight to dictate the editorial choices. So not to denigrate anybody personally, but my least favorite action movie of all time that literally drives me crazy is The Bourne Supremacy. It is so frenetic and so crazy with the way that it does the fight sequences and the driving chase sequences. The entire movie, I'm like, what's happening? What is happening right now? That there's no semblance of any continuity or being able to track anything because it's so frenetic. The
it's a
opposite,
masterclass in confusion.
that's a perfect way to put it. It's a masterclass in confusion. I don't think that the Bourne Identity or the Bourne Ultimatum suffer from the same challenges. There's
Mm,
something specifically about the directorial and the editorial choices in the Bourne Supremacy that to
supremacy,
me
yeah.
make it so hard to watch. And that's a personal preference. It's not saying that it's bad. It's just not my style, and it's not one that I enjoy. The polar opposite of that would essentially be the Karate Kid. When I watched and this is one of the coolest parts of my entire career, was going through the raw dailies of the Daniel Johnny fight sequence at the end of Karate Kid 1. I've seen all the raw dailies, and this is,
No.
yep, I've watched all of them because I had to find little pieces here and there for montages. We have all the raw film scans, which is like the coolest thing.
Oh
And here's
man.
how they do it. They set up a camera, they say fight, and they do the entire fight sequence in a take. There's no breaks. There's no zooming in. Ooh, let's get this one punch. Let's get this one kick. They rehearsed it like it was a dance. They spent months rehearsing it so that they could do it at full speed, but not
Mm,
actually have what looked like full contact. Right. So we think it's full contact, but to them, they're barely hitting each other. But that was because it was so highly rehearsed. So you watch the entire point from beginning to end in multiple angles. Nowadays, the tendency is let me get this one punch and zoom in here. Now I'm going to
yeah.
zoom in here. I'm going to get this one kick. And the directorial choices on the show are kind of sort of in between, where
Hmm.
especially because like if we were to look at the two final tournament sequences at the end of season 4, either between Hawk and Robbie or between Sam and Tori, right? Those are huge sequences, multiple pages. There's no way that you're going to shoot all those in a single take, but they do their best to get as much of the choreography in as they can safely. So I'm very, very consciously making the choice. How long can I hang on this without feeling like I'm editorially manipulating the entire fight sequence. And that's partially about pacing, that's partially about energy, but it's also partially about protecting the actors, because you
Mm,
always want to make sure that they look crisp and they're fast. So yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of manipulation, but I'm trying to manipulate it as little as possible while maintaining the energy. Like I would say that the most extreme example of the older school style that I think is done effectively would be the John Wick movies, where if you really pay attention to the way that those fight scenes are cut, you're like,
yeah.
this has been going for like 45 seconds without an edit. Like, and we're so used to seeing such fast cuts that we just assume it's cutting. And then you watch it again, and you're like, wait, there were no edits in there. And you realize they're actually doing what you're seeing. I have a lot of respect for that. So I'm trying to find the middle ground, knowing that there's only so much you can get in a single take. But for me, the most important thing, not just for fight sequences, but as an editor in general, is I never want somebody to say, wow, the editing in that scene was really good. I want them to
Mm,
say, wow, that was a really good scene, because it's never about, look at how good I am at cutting, right? I want it to be invisible. And sometimes it's very visible. And somebody say, oh, that was so well cut. But at the end of the day, I just want them to say, wow, that was an awesome scene. And I want to be as invisible as possible, depending on what the tone or the energy is that's necessary for that scene or sequence.
That's a whole lot that goes into every minute detail within filmmaking. And with regards to our previous comment about actors and editors, I guess it kind of makes sense why you call it the ultimate collaborative art form too.
Yeah,
You know,
there's no way to make film or television in a vacuum, at least
no,
at a large enough level, right? Like obviously you can have an iPhone, you can shoot your own thing and edit your own thing and color your own thing, but that's going to have severe limitations. So there
exactly.
is no more collaborative art form, and I think that's really the power of film and television and cinema, is that it's not one singular mind or one singular vision or idea. And even if you look at the most auteur of auteurs in our generation, if you're going to look at either Tarantino, Scorsese, or Christopher Nolan, they're as close as you get to being auteurs as possible. And all three of them will say, this wouldn't be what it is without my editor or my cinematographer or my actors, because everybody brings their own thing to it. So there is no more collaborative art form. And if you're going into it because you want it to be about you and your ideas, film and cinema are not the art form for you.
Cinema is not content.
Oh God, yes. They both start with a C, but they're definitely very, very different things.
Exactly.
Yeah, the whole content conversation. I hate creating content, right? Like a podcast, yes, it's content creation. I totally get that. But I went through the process for about a year, and this is disconnected from being an editor, but being a podcaster and running a coaching and mentorship program and having an online
I want to
business.
talk about that as well. I want to talk
Yeah,
about
but
that
I
and
went through the process for over a year of learning the concept and the business of repurposing content. And
Mhm.
I hated it because it wasn't actually creating anything new. It was just, how do I take this one thing and slice it into 30 different versions and say, I'm creating 30 pieces of content a day. I'm like, oh, it's just,
Was that for social
that's not
media
my
or?
style. Yeah, that was for social media, for YouTube. And I eventually was like, this is not how I want to spend my time. So I'm looking into much different ways to create content. But for me, it's not just about how do I put more content into the world. My approach is, and this is what I tell my team, is that anything that we create, whether it's a newsletter, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a course, whether it's a workshop, it has to do one of three things, and ideally all three. It needs to motivate, it needs to educate, it needs to inspire. If it doesn't do at least one, if not all three of those, I'm not doing it. And there are a whole
Nice.
slew of things, like on TikTok, you can follow the latest trends. It does none of those, right? It'll distract, but that's about it. Maybe it will entertain, but if it doesn't motivate, educate, or inspire, I'm not interested in creating it, and it's not content that I want to create.
True. Could you talk to me a little bit about those three? Like, just go into those three: motivation, education, and inspiration.
Yeah.
Because I
So
feel like
what?
that's some gold right there.
Well, and not only here's where it gets really interesting, is that I don't have a lot of separation between the work that I do as an editor and a filmmaker and the work that I do as a podcaster, as a teacher, as a coach, right? So if we were to go backwards a step, if we're looking at the work that I really want to be a part of collaborating as a filmmaker, it has to educate,
Hmm.
motivate, inspire. And I would argue that Cobra Kai consistently does all three.
It
right?
does.
It inspires the hell out of people. And I know that because Karate Kid inspired me to learn karate. And like that, it really was one of the most formative, if not the most formative movie or TV show of my entire youth that has led to my character development to this day. It's also educational and that you learn things and learn mindsets and learn about life, right?
Values.
And yeah, learn values, and it's also motivational. So I would argue that that is quote unquote content, which it isn't, but it's motivational, educational, and or inspirational content. And now I'm just doing something very similar in a slightly different realm. So when it comes to the educational side of things, I'm a big believer that anything I put out into the world, you have to be learning from it. Because if you're
Mm.
not learning, you're growing. And literally one of the most important things that you need to introduce in your life, if you literally want to lengthen your lifespan, is you need to constantly be learning things. You need to be stretching your brain, which goes back to, again, the neuroscience and this thing that's called neuroplasticity. Right? We believed for most of human existence that our intelligence was fixed, that our brain was fixed, and that after a certain point, even of our character traits and our personality were fixed. Right? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. But they're now
Mm.
finding that's not true at all. And because of neuroplasticity and for the brain and the literal neural pathways to constantly change and evolve, if you want to lengthen your lifespan and also improve the quality of the life within those years, you need to constantly be learning things. So I always want to create something that's going to force people to learn and step a little bit more outside of their comfort zone. And I also
That's
want something, I want it to, if you're giving people information, but you're not inspiring them or motivating them to take action, then what's the point? And I feel
mm.
like that a lot of what the internet has become and a lot of what content has become is an information fire hose. You can go on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, wherever it is. You can consume information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until the end of time. None of that makes any difference if you're not taking action. So you can
100.
have the education and the information, but if you're not either motivated to take that action or inspired to do so, then you're just passively consuming rather than actively taking action.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, I guess when you said, you know, the more you keep learning, you have the tendency for your lifespan to increase is higher. It kind of also attests to the fact that you have a purpose in life and you want to learn more and you get all these nuggets of information, turn that into knowledge, which eventually becomes wisdom. It's purposeful. And even in cinema, usually the first characters to die are the ones without a purpose.
Yeah, I mean that if we're gonna break it down, like the literal
Yeah.
hero's journey is you have this person that is in
Yeah.
their ordinary world, and they don't want to be in their ordinary world any for whatever the reason is. It's going to be different in every story, but they're called to adventure, and it's largely about achieving some form of a purpose. Right?
Exactly.
Sometimes the purpose is I just want to be alive. I want to not die because somebody's coming after me or whatever it might be. Right? It can be like we're not really working towards our true life's purpose in the Friday the 13th movies. Right? It's more for mindless entertainment, but the
Survival.
purpose is I would like to stay alive. Right?
Yeah.
But there has to be some form of a purpose. And what happens a lot, very, very commonly with kind of the evolution from childhood to adulthood, is that we have all these dreams and we have all these things that we want to achieve, but we're conditioned by the educational system to become a very specialized cog in a machine. And we lose a sense of our own internal purpose because the purpose is to achieve whatever goals or objectives the company wants us to achieve. Right. So we're just taught how to perform, but we forget how to learn. And we forget that learning is part of becoming better at performing, but we get so stuck in what's called performance mode that we say, well, I've gotten to a certain point. I've reached a certain level of efficiency or effectiveness. So I don't need to learn anymore. Now I'm good at this thing. But as soon as you stop learning, that's when your brain literally starts to shrink. And if you don't have a purpose that you want to work towards, well, then why learn anything new? If the purpose is I just need to pay my bills and I need to accrue more money so I can buy more stuff, well, yeah, then you're not going to have much of a purpose and you're not going to be motivated or inspired to learn or educate yourself. So that's why for me, these three things have to be intrinsically linked in anything that I create and put out into the world, because that is what I see as my purpose.
I was just gonna ask you, Zach, what is your purpose?
Yeah. So for me, and it's taken years to figure this out, but essentially my mission is to inspire people to step outside their comfort zones so that they can realize their true potential. I believe that the vast majority, 99.999% of people in the world have not even scratched the surface of what their actual human potential is, but we're not conditioned or taught how to achieve that potential. But I see potential in every single person. Most of it is not realized. So I see
Mm.
it as my purpose to help people realize that potential, which is why everything that I create at a minimum has to either motivate, educate, inspire, ideally all three.
Fantastic. And I want you to talk to me a little bit about how you got into coaching and all that, but also fitness. You did American Ninja Warrior, unless I'm mistaken.
I did, yeah. So
Yeah.
I've trained for American Ninja Warrior for a little over 5 years. I've
Hmm.
competed on the show twice. I'm not a very good Ninja Warrior, so if anybody's going online like, "Ooh, what episode was he in?" I haven't actually made the cut yet. Still working on that. That's the last component of the goal. But yeah, I've been training for a Ninja Warrior for about 5 years. I've gone to numerous competitions. I've been on the set twice. Literally been in the Superdome with 30 cameras on me, and very quickly got wet, which is why you haven't seen me on the show yet. But yeah, the what I discovered fairly early on in my career as an editor is that if you're only prioritizing the work, then your output and your creativity go way down because you just become an extension of your workstation. But the way that the industry is designed, they just expect you for every waking hour and most of your sleeping hours to just be in front of your computer and constantly be a drone. Like, I'm just there to do the work, but you can't do your best work and you certainly can't collaborate with people if you're not focused on your health. So I started to combine my love of martial arts and athletics and everything else with my love of creative work and combine them. So I actually had started years ago this program that was called Fitness in Post. And it was essentially about getting editors outside the edit bay, hiking, getting sun, being more
Was this
mobile,
something
being
you
more.
started? Was this
Yes, this
something
is
you?
something that I started. So it was about 10 years ago now. It was basically a hiking group and a fitness group that I turned into a podcast, which then led to where we are now. But initially, it was just a hobby or an obsession where I wanted to help other editors get healthier so they could be better at their work. And that
Mm.
eventually evolved into what's now Optimize Yourself, which is self-guided courses. It's online coaching. I've got live classes. I've got a whole litany of resources, all of which are designed to help people, especially those that do creative work, design the more balanced, sustainable, and fulfilling careers that they deserve. Because it is nearly impossible to be your best and achieve your creative potential if you're stuck inside a small, dark room for 16 hours a day, eating the pizzas that are being shoved under the crack in your door to keep you working.
That is so true. And I mean, it's inspiring to just hear what you've been up to. This is something you started out of passion, and that's led to where you are right now. And it's not so. It's very rare that you get people working in post focusing on fitness, and
Very, very rare. Yes.
very rare.
I was the only one at the time. I've started a little bit of a mini movement because of it over the years. But yeah, fitness and health are they're not prioritized in the industry the way that they should be. When I started 10 years ago, nobody was willing to even say the words mental health. Nobody would talk about depression. Nobody would talk about burnout. These were taboo. And I just put it out there that these need to be talked about
How
because number
often do you
one,
balance? Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, how often do you oscillate between the two? You got to work, crank the work in, meet deadlines, but also take time out for yourself and focus on fitness. How do you oscillate between these two?
I mean,
Is
it's a challenging question to answer simply, but the
Mm.
simplest version is that I want to focus on all of them every single day. I want to make sure that in the course of any given day that
Mhm.
I've prioritized several hours towards my deep creative work, whether that's editing, whether that's writing, whether that's podcasting. And
Mm.
I also want to have some form of mental wellness and well-being and physical. So whether it's physical movement, whether it's meditation, whether it's taking a walk, I always want some component of that. But you have to see it on a sliding spectrum where on any given normal day, my hope is that I've done, maybe 30, 45 minutes of physical activity, some form of a mental practice. And maybe, I've done maybe oops, I'll let you cut that out. Or some
You
form
want
of
to pick
more
that up?
intense physical exercise. But there are also going to be times where you're just in the trenches. So if it's a
Mm.
matter of any normal given day when I'm editing Cobra Kai, I'm going to do my best to keep it to an 8 or a 9 hour day and make sure that I fit in some form of health and wellness. And I'm also consistently sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night. If I'm editing a season finale of Cobra Kai, I might be in the trenches for a month or two, and I might be putting in longer hours and sacrificing some exercise. But the trap that I don't want to fall into, that so many people, if not almost everybody, falls into, is I'm going to get healthy when hiatus comes. When this
Mm.
project is done, then I'm going to get healthy. But then the project is done, and you're so wiped out and exhausted that you say,
You don't have
"Well,
the energy.
I'm just gonna recover." But then
Yeah.
when the next project starts, then I'm going to figure it out. Then I'm going to build in the habits. Then the next project starts, and you get too busy and you say, I'll get healthy when the next hiatus comes. And then you drop dead at your desk at 45 years old of a massive heart attack. I've seen it happen more than once. So in my mind, there is an oscillation to a certain extent, but I never want it to be about I'm going to get to that. On some level, every single day, I want there to be a minimum of some form of practice that specifically is focusing on my health and my well-being, and it's not just about getting the work done, because life is too short to just be an extension of my computer and get the work done.
I absolutely love that. The fact that you prioritize doing this every single day. So no matter how much longer you have to work on a project, you've been putting in the work little by little, and that compounds to a much bigger end result at the end of the
Yep.
day.
And
That's
one
fantastic.
thing to clarify, I'm not always successfully prioritizing it every single day.
But you're
I
trying.
struggle. I struggle like everybody else, but I'm
Yeah.
always trying because I'm a recovering workaholic. So I always want to be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's my default setting, and that's the way that I used to function. Is that I could easily work 20 hours a day, sleep for 4, and go back and work another 20. It's not sustainable, but I could do it for a period of time when I was in the trenches. I refuse to do that under every single circumstance. There is no world where I will work that way anymore, but I know I'm capable of it. So I'm not always successfully prioritizing health and well-being and physical exercise and meditation and sleep and everything else, but I'm always making an attempt every single day to try to prioritize it. Usually I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. The one thing that for the most part is an immovable object for me is sleep. That's my one thing that it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. I am not going to sleep less than 7 hours a night. I don't care how important your deadline is. If you're asking me to sacrifice sleep, your lack of planning is not my emergency. I'm going to get my 7 or 8 hours of sleep. So that to me is an immovable object. Beyond that, it varies from 2 to 3 hours of ninja training to a 5 minute walk around the block. It could be either or depending on the day.
I freaking love it. I love it, man. Actually, martial arts. What did you practice, and
Uh,
how?
so I the when I was practicing, and I don't practice anymore. I wish that I could say that I could. It's one of those things that I keep saying I'm going to try and fit in, and I've tried here and there, but with 2 kids and a job and a business, it's something that I have not been able to stick with consistently. But when I was younger, it was from 12 years old until about 22. So for about 10 years, I practiced a traditional mixed martial art. When you say mixed martial arts today, you picture UFC. It was a
Hmm.
traditional mixed martial art, which was Kenpo, Jiu Jitsu, and a form called Chinese China. So it
Hmm.
was a lot of Kenpo was very, very similar to what they teach in Cobra Kai. It's a very, very
Yeah.
similar style to Tatang Sudo. A lot of short, quick strikes. It's all stand up, a lot of punches, a lot of kicks, a lot of traditional katas or forms. So I would have to do 3 or 4 different forms to get every belt.
So
But
Kenpo
then
karate, right? Kenpo
yeah, so
karate.
correct.
Kenpo karate.
Kenpo karate was the foundation of it, and then there was a significant amount of jiu-jitsu mixed in, but not Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There was very little
Mhm.
ground grappling. It was more
Yeah.
traditional throw. So it was, if you didn't know any
Japanese
better, you'd
jiu-jitsu.
think that it was actually judo because judo and jiu-jitsu look very, very similar. But it was jiu-jitsu, and then Chinese China. For anybody that doesn't know martial arts, it's very similar to this kind of stuff that you see Steven Seagal doing, like the joint manipulations with the wrists and the elbows and the shoulders, a lot of that kind of stuff. And then when I was in college, I specifically learned Brazilian Jiu Jitsu because I wanted to add the ground grappling to it.
Yeah.
I've forgotten most of it every once in a while, like just like through some sheer form of muscle memory, like just
Mhm.
intrinsically, I'll do something like, oh, I forgot that I even knew how to do that. So if you ask me to do the bow staff form that I had to learn to get my black belt, don't remember a single move. But a lot of the mindsets have certainly stuck, and they're the mindsets that I teach to this day. But let's just say I don't have the hamstring flexibility that I did when I was 18.
Use it or lose it, huh?
Yeah, use it or lose it. And I've tried getting back into it, and my brain thinks I'm 18, and my body's like, "You are not 18 anymore. You might want to ease back a little bit." Because part of my Ninja Warrior training, the trainer that I worked with is also a stunt person and a martial artist, and they were introducing martial arts into my training just to help with flexibility and speed and balance.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you really do lose it if you don't use it, because things that were so easy for me, I was like, wow, this is actually really challenging now. So yeah, it's mentally and emotionally, martial arts is still very much at the core of who I am. Physically, not so much.
Did you ever use the nunchucks?
Very sparingly. I never actually learned nunchucks as a weapon or as a form, but
Gotcha.
oddly enough, my ninja trainer was using nunchucks to help me develop coordination and balance and forearm strength. So one of the exercises that she had me do is I would stand on like this like a very cushy ball that keeps you very much off balance. And then
Mm.
while I was standing out with one leg, I'd have to like spin nunchucks for like a minute. So that would
Mm.
help me build forearm endurance while also learning coordination and
Oh,
balance.
yeah.
But I don't think I could stand here for a minute, like on one knee, and I could attack anybody. It looks really, really goofy. So yeah, as far as a nunchuck form, definitely not my thing.
Gotcha. So when editors are usually in the trenches for quite a long time, you come across this phenomenon called being snowblind. You know, you're so day in day out, you're with the footage. You kind of
Mm-hmm.
tend to lose your way. You're like, does it actually work, or
Mm-hmm.
is it actually good? How do you get out of that? Is there anything specifically that you
Yeah,
do?
I've got a couple of things you can do. The first one to get out of it is to literally get out of it. Get the
Mm.
hell out of your room and go walk outside. The last place that you're going to solve all of your creative problems is in front of your computer.
Yeah.
That's not my opinion, that's science, right? All of the best ideas are going to come on a walk, doing dishes, boiling water while you're cooking, taking a shower, brushing your teeth, because it's a completely different network of the brain. It's called the default network. So if you're
Taking a
stuck on a
shit.
problem, get away from the computer. But the other thing that I do is when I'm working versus when I'm consuming, I literally do it in different spaces. So if I'm going to watch something down, I don't like if I'm here at my computer and I'm editing and I'm doing the scenes and I'm looking at the dailies and I'm cutting the scene. When I
Mm-hmm.
actually want to watch what I've done, I sit on the couch. It's a different
Mm.
perspective and a different viewpoint. So I change my perspective constantly. That's a really, really important part of the process. Another thing that I'll do, and this is a trick that I learned from a fellow editor friend of mine, is that if you've gotten to the point where your brain is literally burned into your memory when the next shot is going to be or what the composition looks like, this is a really cool trick that I never believed worked until I did it. And it depends on the NLE, so technically I won't get into it. But essentially, on whatever layer or whatever you need to do, you literally flop it 180 degrees and you
Okay.
watch it as if you're watching the mirror image, and you
Okay.
experience it differently because you can't predict where the cuts are or what the composition of the shot is. It's a
Oh
really
shit.
cool exercise. You literally just flop the entire image and watch it, and you're like, that cut doesn't work anymore. That's so weird. It's a very interesting experience, but again, it goes back to the basic neuroscience of how the brain consumes this information.
I'm gonna try this. I'm in the middle of
Yeah.
an edit. I'm gonna try this.
Just literally flop the entire image. Just put an adjustment layer or nest it, whatever you need to do with your
Yeah.
NLE, and you're going to be like, what is happening? And then the last thing I'll add, kind of a fourth bonus one. So if we're going through this list, one, get the hell out of the room, right?
Mm.
Actually get some air. The second one is that I want you to change where you are in space and watching. And even if it's a small room and you only have two spaces, go from here to here.
Yeah.
Little things make a difference. The third, flop the image. The fourth, and this is usually the most effective one, watch it with somebody else in the room. That changes the entire game. It goes back to this idea of empathy and being able to feed off of somebody else's energy. We've
That's
all
what
had that
you're.
experience where you watch something, you're like, this is perfect. This is done. Somebody watches it with you, they don't say a word. You're like, whoa, this needs a whole lot of work. This isn't working and this is out of place. Watch it with somebody next to you. It changes the whole experience.
That's so true.
Even if they know nothing, even if they don't even know what you're working on, they're not there to give you feedback. They don't have
Yeah.
the level of education to say, this doesn't work or I don't like the music choice. It doesn't matter. Another warm body in the room experiencing it will give you new insights.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. Sure.
That's amazing. And so, final question: if there was anything that you could have, gone back in time and advised yourself, not just in film editing, career-wise, but anything in general, what would that have been?
I think the advice that I would give myself, that I still have to give myself to this day, is that it's okay to slow down. It's okay to not try to do everything at once, right? You're gonna have plenty of time to do all of these things, but if you try to do all of them at once, you're gonna
Mm,
burn yourself out, and it's nearly impossible to do it all at once. I do believe that you can do it all. You can't do it all at the same time. I have a million things that I want to accomplish with the years that I have left, but you have to be very selective and prioritize what it is that you want to focus on next. And I am notorious to this day for setting unrealistic expectations because I want to do everything and I want to do it all now. And it's all urgent and it must be done immediately. And I always have to remind myself it's okay to slow down.
that's fantastic. Zach, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all these nuggets of wisdom. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and I am definitely motivated, educated, and inspired. Thank you,
I
man.
love to hear it. You're more than welcome. Thank you for the time. And I'm glad we could finally make it happen.
100%. Thanks so much again, Zach. And until next time, this is Junkyard Theory, folks.